Using backward chaining to teach hand washing. When teaching a skill with backwards chaining, the task is broken down into a list of smaller steps called a task analysis. For example, hand washing can be broken down into the following 8 steps. Turn on water, wet hands, get soap, rub hands together, rub back of left hand, rub back of right hand, rinse hands, and turn off water. Each step of the task analysis is taught individually. At first, the learner is only required to complete the last step independently. The staff will use a physical prompt for the learner to complete all steps except for the last one. If the learner does not complete the step being taught within 5 seconds, the staff will provide a prompt using the least to most prompting hierarchy. The least to most prompting hierarchy includes the following prompts: gestural, model, light physical or partial physical, and full physical. Each prompt provides a different level of assistance to the learner. As you go up the hierarchy, more assistance is given to the learner to help them make the correct response. The first prompt in the sequence is a gestural prompt. When using a gestural prompt, the staff points or indicates the movement that they want the student to complete. Let's look at an example. In this example, the staff points to the back of the left hand for the student to wash. The next prompt is a model prompt. When using a model prompt, the staff models the step or provides an example of how to complete the step without physically touching the learner. For example, the staff will model rinsing their hands underneath the water. The next prompt is a light physical or partial physical prompt. In this case, the staff will provide minimal physical guidance for the learner to complete the task. This can include touching the learner's hand to initiate movement. It can also include touching behind the elbows and pushing gently to guide them toward the desired task. In this example, the staff gently pushes the learner's elbows toward the water. She also gently touches both arms to keep the learner's hands under the water. The last prompt in the sequence is a full physical prompt. This is also known as hand-over-hand prompting. When using this prompt, the staff will physically put their hands on the student's hands and guide them to physically complete the task using no more than equal and opposite pressure. In this example, the staff is using hand-over-hand prompting to help the learner complete the first few steps of hand washing. When using least to most prompting, the learner is given a specified amount of time to make a correct response. In this case, it is 5 seconds. If the response does not occur within the specified amount of time, the staff will provide a prompt of least assistance. In this case, it's a gestural prompt. The staff will wait again for the learner to emit the response. If the learner still does not make a response, the staff will provide another prompt that gives slightly more assistance to the learner. For example, a model prompt. Again, the staff will wait the specified amount of time for the learner to make a response. This will continue until the learner makes the correct response. You may have noticed that verbal prompts are not included in this prompting hierarchy. That's because while verbal prompts can be very effective, they are the hardest prompt to fade. Remember, our goal is to have the learner complete the task without our assistance. So it's very important that you don't use any verbal prompts other than to start the task by saying something like, "Let's wash hands," or "Time to wash hands." When recording data, the staff will record the level of prompting that was used for the learner to complete each step of the task analysis. If the learner did not require any prompting for one or more steps, the staff will record that the learner completed those steps independently. Now we're going to look at some examples. In the first example, staff will prompt Beth to complete all steps of hand washing except for turning off the water, which is the last step. The staff will allow Beth 5 seconds to complete the last step on her own before providing a prompt. In this example, Beth completed the last step independently. If Beth had not turned off the water within 5 seconds, the staff would have provided a gestural prompt. The learner will be required to complete the last step independently until he or she reaches the predetermined mastery criteria. Then, the learner will be required to complete the last 2 steps independently. Let's look at another example. In the next example, staff will prompt Beth to complete all steps of hand washing except for the last 2 steps, which are rinse hands and turn off water. The staff will allow Beth 5 seconds to rinse her hands on her own. If she does not rinse her hands within 5 seconds, the staff will use least to most prompting for Beth to complete the task. After Beth rinses her hands, staff will wait 5 seconds for Beth to complete the next step in the task analysis, which is turn off water. In this example, Beth did not rinse her hands within 5 seconds, so the staff provided a gestural prompt. However, Beth still did not complete the step after 5 more seconds, so the staff provided a model prompt. Again, Beth did not rinse her hands after the prompt, so staff provided a light physical prompt by gently pushing her elbows toward the water so that she could rinse her hands. When recording the data, you would record a P for steps 1 through 6 as the staff physically prompted Beth to complete those steps. Beth completed step 7 with a light physical prompt, so you would record an LP for step 7. She independently turned off the water, so you would record an I for step 8. Beth will continue to work on rinsing her hands until she completes it by herself independently for several trials, and she reaches mastery criteria. Once she masters a step, Beth will be required to complete the last 3 steps independently. As the learner consistently completes the steps independently, the staff will fade back by prompting less and less. The learner will be required to complete additional steps in the process, working backwards until he or she is able to complete the entire process independently. Always remember to give verbal praise and any specified reinforcer when the learner completes a task independently. Remember, it's important to reinforce the behaviors that we want to see more of. It's also important to minimize the amount of reinforcement you give the learner if he or she requires a physical prompt to complete the task. Let's practice by watching some more examples. In this example, Beth was learning to complete the 4th step of hand washing, which is rubbing hands together. The staff physically prompted Beth to complete the first 3 steps of hand washing. The staff waited 5 seconds for Beth to rub her hands together. After 5 seconds, the staff provided a gestural prompt. However, Beth did not rub her hands together. After 5 more seconds, the staff modeled rubbing hands together, and Beth performed the step after the model prompt. When recording the data, you would record a P for steps 1 through 3 as the staff physically prompted Beth to complete those steps. Beth completed step 4, rub hands together, with a model prompt, so you would record an M. Beth completed the remainder of the steps independently, so you would record an I for steps 5 through 8. In the previous example, Beth was learning to complete the first step of hand washing, which is turn on water. In this example, Beth did not turn on the water independently. The staff waited 5 seconds and provided a gestural prompt. Beth completed the rest of the task analysis independently. When recording the data, you would record a G for a gestural prompt for turning on the water. Beth completed the rest of the steps independently, so you would record an I for steps 2 through 8. In the previous example, Beth did not complete step 5, which is rub back of left hand, or step 6, which is rub back of right hand, independently. Beth had previously mastered or learned these steps, but appears to have forgotten them or had gotten stuck. So the staff waited 5 seconds for Beth to rub her hands, and then provided a gestural prompt for each hand. When recording the data, you would record a G for both steps 5 and 6, as Beth required gestural prompts to complete both steps. All of the other steps were completed independently, so you would record I's for all of the other steps in the task analysis. Now we're going to discuss what to do if your student makes a mistake. If the learner makes a mistake, for example, if he or she skips a step, the staff should physically prompt the learner to complete the previous step that was completed correctly, and then immediately provide a prompt for the step that is being taught. This is called back-step error correction. For example, if the learner rubs the back of his right hand and then incorrectly attempts to turn off the water before rinsing his hands, the staff should physically prompt the learner to rub the back of his right hand again and then immediately use a gestural prompt to rinse hands. The staff should not wait 5 seconds before providing the prompt. The reason we use the back-step error correction in this case is because the steps of a task analysis are a sequence of responses called a behavior chain. In a behavior chain, the completion of each step in the chain signals the learner to start the next step. For example, the student learns that after he or she turns off the water, the next step is to wet hands. In a chain, the completion of each step also reinforces the previous step. For example, as the learner wets his hands, the act of turning on the water is reinforced. As the learner completes the steps in the chain, the steps become linked together. Because the steps are linked together in a behavior chain, it is important that the learner practices the steps in the correct order. In our example, if the learner did not re-perform the previous step completed correctly, which was rubbing the back of the right hand, he or she may think that the correct sequence of hand washing involves the following: rub the back of right hand, turn off water, turn on water, rinse hands, and turn off water. By having the learner re-perform rubbing the back of the right hand, the learner learns the steps in the correct sequence.